Okay, I guess I just start talking. Hello, I am Anna LoPrete. I am the music librarian at the Great American Songbook Foundation, and I am the current coordinator of MLA's Sheet Music Interest Group. I'm going to talk today about a database I created to collect metadata about our sheet music collections. The Great American Songbook Foundation has a significant amount of popular American sheet music focused on the 1920s to 60s, but with some expansion on either side. We currently have approximately 36,000 inventory titles with around 50 page boxes of sheet music still to inventory. The current inventories contain title, larger work title, composer, lyricist, and in some cases, publication date. They're useful for known item searches. They are not useful for discovery. To really make our sheet music collections work for us, we needed a system to harvest robust metadata. My database uses the proprietary software Caspio and is called Eureka 2.0. Jazz hands are recommended, but not, required. It is intended for internal use only. My goal is to get us into the Sheet Music Consortium where the public will be able to search our collections. I have input data from approximately 600 pieces of sheet music. I'm going to do a quick demo of the data collection form and weave in use cases as I go. Let me share my screen. Yeah, that one. Okay. So this is the data collection form. There are 8 sections. Next to each field, there is a small question mark that if you hover over will give you information on how to fill out the field. The information collected in this form goes into an extensive table called sheet music. There are several other tables that serve as lookups for some of the data. Unlike other sheet music projects that I've worked on, I try to use controlled vocabularies wherever possible. I use the name authority file for people and place names, LCGFT and LCSH. It requires some extra time to look up the values and add them to their respective tables. However, I think it is worth it. The first section is for local information. There's a dropdown for collection that contains values from another table. The identifier is extremely important here because in addition to containing a unique value associated with that piece of sheet music, it also provides the location of the item. The condition and condition notes are in case we use the database to check for duplicates when processing new collections. The condition notes field includes a drop-down menu with various kinds of things like brittle pages and missing bits. At this point, our sheet music is not digitized except on a piecemeal basis when somebody asks for it. But when it is, there's a box for digitized and a field for the file name. The next section is for title information. There's space for title, 4 alternative titles, larger work title, series title, first line, and first line of chorus. For contributor information, I have space for 4 composers, 4 lyricists, 2 arrangers, 4 performers, and other name. The authorized names are stored in a people table that currently contains more than 1,300 names. When you begin typing the name, the possible values appear in a list. Like that. To add a new value, you do have to add it directly into the table. The cover information is probably my favorite part. We use the covers of sheet music extensively in our social media, exhibits, and other content. The fields for cover artist and cover engraver are the only people fields that are not controlled, since often the full names of the artists aren't used and aren't known. Cover subject is the first of several controlled subject fields. The terms come from LCSH and are stored in a subjects table. Cover featured person 1 and 2 are for when there's a picture of a performer on the cover. This data is often replicated in the performer fields in the contributor section. We often look for sheet music that has a specific person on the cover. The cover description field is a free text field for describing the cover. Some of the notes I've added are red, white, and blue cover with symbol of Army Air Corps and illustrated cover of disembodied hands holding bayonets. This way we can search for specific keywords and find sheet music with that image on the cover. Publication information helps with identification and finding of duplicates. Some of this information is also to help me if I ever decide to make MARC records using MARC Edit. I have a checkbox for advertisements because some scholars look at the advertisements on historic sheet music, and that might help them identify that. For musical information, there's a drop-down list where you can select instruments. Most of the sheet music we own is for voice and piano, but not all of it. There's also an option for vocal duet, which comes up fairly frequently, and identifying those is a need that we often face. There is a checkbox if the sheet music includes chord symbols of some kind and a drop-down for key. The form, genre, style field includes values from the Library of Congress genre form terms, and you can select multiple terms. Most of our music is songs and popular music, and it sometimes seems redundant to select those for every title. However, since I want our data to go into Sheet Music Consortium, which also includes classical music, we add it for every item. The larger work genre includes values for musicals, reviews, motion pictures, television music, and operettas. The subject information I think will prove most useful to us. My team members will be able to search for specific topics using a search form, or use the table itself to filter and see a list of all possible topics. In case you're wondering, according to the random sample of 600 titles in my database, over 30% of popular songs are about love. Name as subject also comes from the people table. Place name subject is a controlled field and comes from the name authority file and is stored in a place name table. Local subject has not been used until recently when I got fed up with there not being an authorized subject heading for heartbreak, so I added it to the local subject headings. I think after love, heartbreak is the second most common topic. And finally, other information includes a field for language. The vast majority of our music is in English, but occasionally there will be a second language. Notes is for information about the sheet music as it was published. Some examples are quoted notes like Simplified Piano Edition, and local notes are for things about our unique copy, like if it's autographed, or I use it to specify that something is an alternate edition if we have more than one version of a song. I also use it when I give something a content warning to record why I gave it that warning. In rare cases, our sheet music might be autographed, so I have a checkbox for that and a field to record who the autographee is. And finally, there's a box for content warning. Some of the songs depict harmful stereotypes or blatantly problematic things. The illustrations on the covers and the advertisements can also be offensive. There are two ways to search the database. One is through a search form, and the other is in the table itself. The form is useful to search a single field when you know what you're looking for. You can't use it to search multiple fields. For instance, you can't search across all 4 composer fields at once. For that, you have to filter in the table. You can use it to search for keywords in the cover description, single dates, subjects, stuff like that. You can use it to narrow the search by whether or not a title has a content warning. For searching multiple fields, like searching in all the composer fields or all the title possibilities, you can filter in the table. You can search a range of dates for content about a specific decade, or to view only music in the public domain. I like to use the table to filter a specific field by is not blank to see the complete list of options. This is particularly useful in fields like performer, cover featured person, topical subject, and place name subject. So that's Eureka 2.0. So far, it's been used only by me. However, I'm previewing it to my team soon, and I hope they'll start using it, and that soon we'll be able to open up the data it collects to the public. All right, I'm going to stop sharing my screen now.
Thank you, Anna. We have 2 questions. Wait, 3 questions. And 38 seconds. Woo! What do you know about the current status of the Sheet Music Consortium?
Not much. I haven't really looked into it yet.
Okay.
I
cool.
know it doesn't look like it's changed since I became familiar with it in 2008, but I don't really know much about it.
Okay, from Andrea, there are 2 questions. What do you put in the advertisement field?
That's a checkbox that's yes or no. Are there
Okay.
are there advertisements or are there not?
Great.
And advertisements can include advertisements for other songs.
Awesome. Okay, and I think you actually answered her other question. So we will move on to, sorry, that was my timer. I think it's Keith next. No, it's Michelle. Michelle, come forth.
Oh,
Hello. Okay, I believe you can see my slideshow.
Yes.
Okay, perfect. All right. This is a story about how I'm completely rearranging the way we handle music and dance periodicals at the Ohio University Music Library. Today we'll cover what we are doing and why, who is involved, and how we are accomplishing this revolution. I want to start with some quick info to help guide your understanding throughout my talk. The title of the presentation and most of my script refers to periodicals. I intentionally chose that instead of serials because I am speaking specifically about journals of all types, magazines, bulletins, newsletters, and annuals, but I am not talking about ongoing publications like all of the M2s that come from AR editions. Also, I won't say Ohio University. I'll simply say Ohio. First, what exactly are we doing? We are revolutionizing the way music-related periodicals are arranged to bring like things together, save the time of the user, and honestly, make it possible to guide people to what they need the way the flight attendants do. I'll be covering each of these maps in greater detail, so I'll fly through them here. This is where we started. This is our initial transition phase, and this is where we intend to go. When I talk about sections of the library, I will usually refer to left and right because when you walk into the library, this is how it's laid out, kind of split in half. Currently, dance books and periodicals come before music scores, which come before music books and periodicals. The what of this project is rearranging the entire library so that like formats are together, which brings me to the why. Carla, the music librarian, mentioned at some point that tours could be lengthy as she explained that books within certain call number ranges were in different places, how music scores were arranged, where to find theses and dissertations, and where to look for periodicals since they were throughout the library. We talked about how nice it would be if she could say all of each format were in one place, and I suggested the harebrained idea to do just that, putting all of the music scores on the left and all of the books on the right, and moving all of the periodicals to line the walls of the library, which brought up all of the other complications of periodicals, such as the fact that they are segregated by subject area. So titles like Ad Parnassum, a journal of 18th and 19th century instrumental music, is nowhere near the African Music Society newsletter in the LC classification, despite being next to each other alphabetically. And my second harebrained idea came to life, that we should arrange them alphabetically by title. But therein lies the most complicated complication. Which title? A great example of is the progression of hi-fi and stereo review. Hi-fi/stereo review became hi-fi music at home, which became High Fidelity and Audiocraft, then High Fidelity in 1951, then Audiocraft for the hi-fi hobbyist, then High Fidelity again in 1959, stayed as High Fidelity but moved publication locations that year, and did the same in 1980. Meanwhile, Musical America was in publication. The two merged to become High Fidelity, incorporating Musical America, which later became Opus, another one that later kept the name but moved locations, which became Stereo Review, then Stereo Review's Sound and Vision, and now simply a website called Sound and Vision. For those keeping score, that's HAMONS. Overall, the why of this project is to pull all of the iterations and parts of one publication together in one place using the most recent title so that users can browse the entirety all at once without knowing the sorted publication history. And now who has volunteered or been voluntold as tribute? The people responsible for the collection and its arrangement, such as myself, the music librarian Carla, the music library support specialist Laura, the student project coordinator Adeline, who has kept all of us on track, the student experts like Spike, Shane, and Theo, who have also done the bulk of the physical shifting, and Ohio's OhioLink Luminaries intern, Alex, have all been involved. Shown here is a map of the first phase of the larger rearrangement, in which all of the shelves along the walls have been cleared, though through a couple of smaller shifts. The periodicals are being moved to those empty shelves. So how are we doing this? Lots and lots of documentation. On the left is the entire spreadsheet listing every periodical we have, along with all of the previous and succeeding titles according to the catalog records we have for each. Of course, we have some that have changed titles over time, and following serials cataloging rules like those set forth by Conser, we have separate catalog records for each version of the title, and this list includes the linking metadata from all of the records. The second and third documents are informational for the students, and the table on the right shows the findings of the Luminaries intern. I can share any of these later if you really want to see, but this really shows the immensity of documentation that it can take to carry out a revolution. Back to the what, this time what the outcomes will look like. Remember when I talked about hi-fi and when I mentioned a finding aid? Here's where it all comes together. I've been working on determining the most recent title of each periodical, connecting all of the previous versions to it, and making the alphabetical list so that the project students can move them physically into their new order. My Luminaries intern has been doing a deeper investigation to verify and improve the list. As the project students move periodicals into place, space is opening up so that the rest of the arrangement can be completed, moving all books A to Z from the left to the right and making room to accommodate the growth in the music scores. In the end, all music periodicals will be arranged by their current titles. We are going to produce a finding aid for the music library's website that provides a list of every possible variation of a serial title in alphabetical order, with some being C references to the current title. These outcomes will facilitate the ease of use of the music library at Ohio. So that's the Lightning version. You can look forward to a possible article in the future that gives it more detail. But thank you for listening to my talk, and thank you to those who are involved in the project.
Awesome. Thank you, Michelle.
Yeah.
So, question from Mark Sharp. Do any of your titles in this project represent analyzed monographic series?
No, they do not. That's being left out entirely. That's a separate project.
Okay. And then one from Rebecca Belford. Does most recent title mean shifting for future title changes?
Yes, that is in the plan. Hopefully we'll have a better idea of what amount of space it takes and where things can move. We are leaving a certain amount of space between at the end of every shelf so that things can grow. Some things can shift pretty easily, but eventually some will likely change longer distances.
Awesome, thank you. And another question from Mark Sharp. Do you worry about latest title if your acquisition of a serial title has ceased?
No, mostly because we are part of that finding aid will include information about current titles when we have things that are so obviously a lot of people are cutting down the amount of print that they get and switching instead to electronic. So that list will include when things have switched to online. It'll mention that things have been ceased publication altogether, but it's something that will be that the documentation will include with directions on how to note that and continue. Does that answer it?
So then we have a question from Margaret Corby. What are you doing with CJK or Cyrillic titles and when the patron knows the periodical by the English title?
That we have, I think, one example, and it the transliterated title starts with the letter Z, so I haven't gotten there yet because I'm working through alphabetically, but that is definitely something to consider. And with the finding aid having C references, it would have both for people to look at and find out where it goes. Part of it has to do with what our label makers can print. So yeah, and I'll definitely add a lot of that to my thoughts.
We have a question from Emily. What spatial opportunities does this project allow for future collection arrangement? In other words, what does this project allow for other collections to move in its place?
So if you think of the Library of Congress classification A through Z, it's the music and dance library. So there's a lot of GV content that comes before the music scores. And then after the scores are more books again, because it goes into the MLs and MTs. So what we're doing is splitting it. So the G's, GV, ML, MT, everything through Z, book-wise will be in one place, which leaves the other half available to expand music scores, which are getting really tightly packed in. I've got like 9 linear feet of M3s that need to get put into their places, and they can't right now. So that's going to make it possible.
Thank you, Michelle.
Sure. Thank you.
And moving on to Keith.
Okay. I think I'm sharing.
You are sharing.
Hurrah. And just as a word of warning, while it's not terribly likely, I am getting over the mega crud that has been laying waste to our library. So if I break into a coughing fit, don't be alarmed. I'm much better than I was earlier in the week. So we're about to migrate to Folio in 3 months, and there's a whole lot that I could say about that, but that is not why I'm here. I'm here to talk about a problem that I'm guessing a fair number of other people also have, although the circumstances may vary. So think of this as 50% how I did it, 50% if anyone else has a better way of doing this, I am all ears. But before we get into that, a brief outline of migration history at UGA. So back in the before times, we used a couple of homegrown systems called Marvel and Galen, the latter of which I have come to think of as a vortex of bad ideas. Although I've been told from the people who still remember Marvel that it was somehow even worse. From 1999 until 2017, we were on Voyager, and at some point during that period, I hope fairly early, we stopped doing local modifications to physical descriptions when we could not find exact matches in WorldCat. You can probably see where this is going. When we migrated to Alma, we also moved to a shared consortial catalog with nightly overlays of updated records from OCLC. And we are hoping that we'll be able to continue that in Folio, but as with most things Folio, there's a big old question mark around that at the moment. So about that vortex of bad ideas, this isn't really the focus, but just for background, Galen had this quirk where you could only have one item record attached to a bib record. And since we barcode all of our parts separately, for music especially, that was a real problem. The workaround for that involved creating lots of dummy bib and holdings records, each of which would have its own call number and enumeration fields. When we moved to Voyager, those mostly all got squished together. But what ended up as the call number of record in the catalog was predictable, but it was not exactly what was on the physical item. So in the course of cleaning up all of those call number problems, that revealed a high comorbidity rate with a bunch of various other problems, including all of those local edits after 8 years of nightly overlays. Yeah, those are all gone. We can still see what they used to say using the version history in Alma for the next couple of months. And after that, we'll have to go back to looking at our physical shelf list cards, which were still maintained up until the Voyager migration. So to put that another way, for all of those things affected by this, we and OCLC are lying to each other about what we own. So that is not ideal. So as long as we're expecting a lot of post-migration cleanup anyway, I figured now was the time to try to identify those items while our tools for doing so are still relatively robust. So in theory, this is very straightforward. We create lists of stuff we want to examine using Alma Analytics. Then we just compare the real count of physical bits we own to what the physical description in the record says we own. So problem number one is figuring out how many physical bits we own. What works for us is a count of the number of item records attached to each holdings record, because we barcode all of our parts individually. And despite Ex Libris's protestations, we retain separate holding records for distinct copies, even if they were in the same location. But and there is a function for that built into Alma Analytics, which is very nice. Other options that could be considered would be using data from the pieces field in item records, which not useful in our situation because it was very inconsistent, mostly either blank or one, because one barcode per item or per part. Or in desperation, we could pull data from the circulation or fulfillment alert notes, things like item consists of 4 pieces, which would obviously pull in a lot more than just piece count information, but could probably be made workable with some open refined cleanup. Problem number 2 is how do we get the physical description? Because guess what's not a data point that exposed in Alma Analytics? So at this point, things get a little bit Rube Goldbergian. So we can use analytics reports to generate item sets in Alma, export those as MARC records, and then extract the physical description data using MARCEdit, and finally combine the data sets in Excel. So in Alma Analytics, I started off by I'm only concerned with music materials. The other sections can worry about this on their own if they want to, which means limiting it to things with a permanent LC class of M or MT. And I chose to create separate lists for single piece versus multiple piece holdings, just because the comparison logic is slightly different. So it's nice to have those totally isolated from each other. Some additional data pulled in for future use, both the network zone and the local bib record identifiers, since we will need to use both of those for various purposes. The alleged OCLC number, so that we can hopefully find something that's a better match if we need to. The full 852 call number field from the holdings records, including any public or non-public notes that may help to explain discrepancies. And for single items, the field 590 local notes, because sometimes, rather than modifying the 300, we left it intact and just stuck a note in there as a stinger saying, surprise, we actually only have the score for this. And then export that as data rather than as a report, because otherwise you will get lots of very pretty merged cells that make it impossible to sort. So to get the rest of the data I need out of MARC, the first step is to create an itemized set in Alma, which I can do by saving the local IDs with their header by themselves to a text file, and then importing that list as the basis for the set. I can then run a job and export the records in that set as a MARC bibliographic file. That does need to be a publicly visible list in order for it to be visible in the jobs view, but you can toggle it back to private if you don't want it cluttering up the view for other people once you're done. And then finally, in MARCEdit, we can use the Export Tab Delimited Records tool to extract just the 001, which contains the local identifier, 300 subfield A and 300 subfield E to use for comparison, and spit that out into a text file. And then finally, in Excel, we can then paste in both data sets, taking care to pre-format everything as text to stop Excel from helpfully converting all of the identifiers to scientific notation and losing the last couple of digits, and then format them as tables, then create a blank column to house the physical description in the analytics table, and join the sets together with the power of VLOOKUP. If you are not familiar with VLOOKUP in Excel, it will take a value from one table, in this case, the local MMS ID from Alma Analytics, find the same value in a second table, the 001 from MARCEdit, and then pull in corresponding data from the same row of the second table, which is our physical description data. So to make the comparison easier, I then set up various conditional formatting rules in a priority order set to stop if true to highlight various situations. So for multiple items, if it says volume or volumes, that's worth a closer look because anything could be going on in that situation. If it says scores plural, that deserves a closer look. And if neither of the above is true and the physical description does not contain any version of the word part, that's a clear danger sign. For single items, the priority order is, again, volume or volumes could be explained by virtually anything, so that's going to need further investigation. And if it says scores, plural, or any version of the word part, that's a danger sign. So I already mentioned 590s, but you can also see here in this example highlighted in yellow is the 852 Z note accompanying media in book, which is something that is not mentioned in the physical description, but explains why there would be two items attached to a record for a single vocal score. Another situation where it's likely to crop up for us is when we have something like a duet that's only published as a single score. So even if the record says it's one piece, through the magic of buying two of them, we stuck a second copy in a pocket so that people could actually use it with a subfield C note that says something like 2 copies of score shelved together for performance purposes. So that is basically where we are. We have not actually started doing anything with this project yet. That is going to be a post-migration project that will probably take a long, long time because we've got other fires that we are desperately trying to put out at the moment. And that's all I got.
We have one question for you and several suggestions in the chat.
Okay.
The question is, do you encounter 300s for scores that have only the number of pages?
I would not be surprised if there were some examples of that. I have not seen it frequently. But now that you mention it, anything cataloged in AACR2 for like a solo instrument would describe it as pages of music. So
I'll
yeah.
just interject here, but not even that. If you go back before AACR2, you
Hmm.
will find records that are describing scores that will only see how many pages they are. They won't say if score, there will be no indication other than your mark type.
Okay, so that's one additional piece of formatting to add to the single items list.